I led 6 men up the bell tower of the Church of the Holy Virgin in Minya, with ropes and iron bars, to tear down the 3 bronze bells that rang every Sunday morning during our time of prayer, and we ripped them from their mounts and sent them crashing through the wooden platform to the stone courtyard below. But when those bells hit the ground, they did not go silent. They began to ring, on their own. With no rope, no hand, no mechanism of any kind, those shattered bells rang out across the city louder than they had ever rung while mounted in the tower, and the sound brought people pouring into the streets, and what happened in the hours that followed shocked not just our neighborhood but the entire nation. Have you ever been so sure you were silencing something that you never considered it might be the very thing God was about to make louder than ever before? My name is Maher Safwat al-Badawi. I'm 29 years old, and on October 8, 2022, I led 6 men into the bell tower of the Church of the Holy Virgin in the Samalut district of Minya, Egypt, to tear down and destroy the church bells that I believed were an act of provocation against the Muslim community. I had no idea that the God whose voice I was trying to silence was about to speak in a way so powerful that it would be reported in newspapers, shared across social media, and whispered about in mosques and churches from Cairo to Aswan for months afterward. I grew up in the Abu Korkus neighborhood on the outskirts of Minya, where the air smelled of sugarcane fields and river mud, and the call to prayer from Al-Rahman Mosque echoed across flat rooftops 5 times a day. My father, Safwat Abdelrahim al-Badawi, was a respected community leader who organized Friday prayer gatherings and settled disputes between families. People called him Hajj Safwat because he had completed the pilgrimage to Mecca twice. My mother, Maher, wore the full niqab and led a weekly Quran circle for neighborhood women. She could recite 14 Jews from memory. Our home sat 4 houses from the mosque, close enough that the adhan was not a sound we heard. It was the air we breathed. While other boys spent their afternoons playing football in the sugarcane clearings or swimming in the irrigation canals, I sat on the tile floor of my father's room, memorizing the Quran. By 15, I had memorized the entire book. The elders at the mosque would say, "Allah has blessed your parents with a special son." I fasted every Ramadan from the age of 11 and added voluntary fasts on Mondays and Thursdays. I never missed a single prayer, not once in my entire youth. My father taught me from childhood that Christians in Egypt were dhimmis, tolerated guests, who should know their place. He said they committed shirk by worshiping a man as God, the one sin Allah would never forgive. He told me their church bells were a deliberate provocation, a sound designed to compete with the adhan and assert Christian presence in Muslim lands. In our area of Upper Egypt, where the Coptic population was significant, tensions over church bells were constant. Boys in our neighborhood threw rocks at church walls during services, and no one corrected them. By 17, I had joined a youth group at the mosque dedicated to resisting what they called Christian encroachment. We petitioned against church building permits, protested bell ringing schedules, and reported churches for alleged noise violations. I believed I was defending the sovereignty of Islam in a land that belonged to Allah. By 27, I had a degree in agricultural engineering from Minya University and was working for a regional development firm. I was engaged to a devout woman named Noura, whose father was a Quran teacher. I had career success, community respect, and absolute certainty. I had everything. Ask yourself this question: have you ever built your entire identity on something you were so sure of that you never once imagined it could collapse? The trigger came in September of 2022. The Church of the Holy Virgin had recently installed 3 new bronze bells in their tower, larger and louder than the old ones. The first Sunday they rang, the sound carried across the entire neighborhood during the time Muslims were heading to the mosque for Duhur prayer. I was walking to the mosque when the bells began, and the sound was so loud it seemed to press against my eardrums. I stopped in the street, my face flushed hot. This was not just noise, this was a declaration. The Christians were announcing themselves over the call to prayer, drowning the adhan in bronze. I told a friend from the youth group, "Those bells are an insult to every Muslim in this city. Someone needs to climb that tower and rip them out. Someone needs to show them that this is a Muslim land and their bells do not belong above our prayer." He looked at me and said, "Then lead it." I could not sleep that night. My mind burned with purpose. I had no idea that the Jesus I planned to silence was preparing to reveal himself in a way so dramatic that the entire nation would hear about it. I spent 2 weeks planning. I recruited 6 men: Adele, a construction worker who knew ropes and pulleys; Taha, my cousin whose apartment sat directly across from the church; Osama, a theology student who could quote hadith about the superiority of the Adhan; Magdi, a childhood friend; Shawki, a powerful man from the sugarcane fields; and Ibrahim, who had once smashed a church speaker system. I chose the Church of the Holy Virgin because it housed the new bells, and the tower was accessible from the rear courtyard. Sunday services began at 8, meaning we could strike at dawn while the building was empty. Our plan was simple: climb the tower, detach the 3 bells with ropes and iron bars, and let them fall. The crash would send a message louder than any petition. I felt completely certain Allah had put this mission in my heart. The night before, I prayed tahajjud at 2:15 in the morning, asking Allah for strength and clarity. But a heaviness settled on my chest. Not anxiety, something deeper, like the air itself was pressing back against my body. I told myself it was Shaitan trying to prevent a righteous act. I barely slept. I had no idea that the weight on my chest was not the enemy trying to stop me, but God trying to warn me. Everything I believed was about to be shattered. Have you ever been so convinced you were silencing something evil that you never stopped to wonder if the sound you hated might be the voice of God? We arrived at the Church of the Holy Virgin at 5:30 on a Saturday morning in early October. The sky over Minya was still dark, just beginning to lighten along the eastern edge where the desert met the Nile Valley. The church was old and solid, limestone walls weathered to pale honey, a square bell tower rising 3 stories above the courtyard, arched windows with simple stained glass, and a wooden cross mounted above the front entrance. The courtyard was empty, the front doors were locked, but the rear entrance to the tower stairwell was a wooden door with a simple latch. We entered silently. The interior of the stairwell smelled of old stone and dust, and something faintly sweet I later realized was incense that had soaked into the walls over decades. The stone steps spiraled upward in the dark. Our flashlights cut narrow beams through air thick with silence. Even here, in a dark stairwell with no congregation, no candles, no music, there was a peace that unsettled me, a weight in the air that felt almost holy. I pushed it down and kept climbing. We reached the bell platform at the top. 3 bronze bells hung from wooden crossbeams, the largest about 3 feet across, the other 2 slightly smaller. They were beautiful, though I refused to admit it at the time. The bronze had been polished, and each bell bore a cross and an inscription in Coptic. The sky through the open arches was turning from black to deep blue. Dawn was close. We worked fast. Adele rigged ropes around the first bell. Shawki and Magdi used iron bars to pry the mounting bolts. The metal groaned, rust flaked. Then the first bell broke free. It swung once, struck the wooden platform with a deep, resonant boom that echoed down the stairwell like a heartbeat, and then it tipped and fell through a gap in the platform. It dropped 3 stories and hit the stone courtyard with a crash that shook the tower under our feet. The second bell followed within minutes, then the third. All 3 bells lay on the courtyard stones below, cracked, dented, scattered among broken wood and dust. I looked down from the platform. I expected silence. I expected satisfaction. What I got instead was something that made the blood drain from my face. That is when it happened. The moment that changed everything I believed about God. The bells began to ring, not a metallic rattle from the impact, not an echo fading from the fall. They rang. All 3 bells, lying broken and cracked on the stone courtyard with no tower, no rope, no human hand anywhere near them, began producing a sound, a deep, resonant, sustained ringing that grew louder with every second. The sound was not possible. Bronze does not ring without being struck. Cracked bells do not produce clean tones. But these bells rang as if they were still mounted in the tower, as if invisible hands were pulling ropes that did not exist. And the sound swelled until it filled not just the courtyard, but the entire neighborhood. It carried over the rooftops. It poured down the streets. It reached the mosque. It reached the sugarcane fields. It reached the river. I gripped the railing of the bell platform, and my hands started shaking. Heat shot through my fingers, up my arms, into my chest. My knees weakened. Then the light came. A golden radiance rose from the courtyard below, centered on the 3 broken bells, And it was not reflected light, not sunrise, not fire. It was generated light, coming from within the bronze itself, pulsing with the rhythm of the ringing. And in that light, I saw a figure, standing among the broken bells. His feet were on the cracked stone, his robe was white, his hands were open at his sides, palms up, and even from 3 stories above I could see the marks in them. His face turned upward and looked directly at me. His eyes held something that demolished every wall I had ever built. Not anger, not punishment, but a grief so deep it felt ancient, and a love so complete it felt like the first morning of the world. I knew who he was, not because of the icons I had seen in churches I passed on the street, because my soul recognized him the way your lungs recognize air. He did not speak with sound. The words arrived inside me whole and undeniable. He said, "Maher, you cannot silence me. I am the sound that was here before the first bell was ever cast, and I will be here after the last one falls. But I did not come to defend my bells. I came for you." My knees buckled. I collapsed on the wooden platform of the bell tower. Tears exploded from my eyes. I wept harder than I had ever wept in my life, harder than I knew a human body could produce tears. My face pressed against the old wood, my fists clenched, my chest heaving. Around me I heard Adele sobbing on the stairwell behind me. Taha had dropped his iron bar and was sitting against the stone arch with tears streaming into his beard. Osama was on his knees on the steps, reciting something. Not Quran, not anything I recognized, just broken syllables between sobs. Magdi had fled down the stairs. Shawky stood frozen at the railing, staring at the courtyard below, tears pouring silently down his face. Ibrahim was curled against the wall, shaking. The bells continued to ring, louder now. People began to emerge from their homes. Christians who had been preparing for Saturday morning prayers, Muslims who had been sleeping, shop owners, children, families. They gathered in the streets around the church courtyard, and they saw the 3 broken bells lying on the stone, ringing with a sound that had no explanation, glowing with a light that had no source. Some fell to their knees. Others stood with their hands over their mouths. Within an hour, the crowd had grown to hundreds. By midday, news had reached social media. By evening, the story was being shared across Egypt, in Coptic Christian groups, in Muslim forums, in secular news threads. The bells of the Church of the Holy Virgin rang for over 3 hours before they finally went silent. No scientist, no imam, no engineer could explain what happened. A priest arrived at the church before 7 that morning, Father Mina. He found me still in the bell tower, still weeping, still unable to stand. He climbed the stairs, knelt beside me on the wooden platform, placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "He loves you, son. He has been waiting for you. Do you understand now? You tried to silence his voice, and he made it louder. That is who he is." Ask yourself this question. How do you explain a sound that cannot exist coming from bells that should be silent, while the living God stands among them and calls your name? I looked at Father Mina through swollen eyes and said the only words I could find. What do I do? How do I follow him? Father Mina helped me to my feet. He walked me down the tower stairs, through the courtyard where the bells still glowed faintly in the morning light, and into the church. He sat me in the front pew, and right there, in the Church of the Holy Virgin, while 3 broken bells lay silent in the courtyard and a crowd gathered outside, he led me in a prayer I repeated through sobs. "Jesus, I have been wrong about you. I tried to tear down your voice. I climbed a tower to silence your bells, but you cannot be silenced. You are alive. You are here. Forgive me. Save me. I surrender my life to you completely." Father Mina embraced me. He wept with me. Within the hour, news of what had happened in the bell tower reached the men who had been with me. 5 of my 6 men, Adele, Taha, Osama, Shawky, and Ibrahim, surrendered their lives to Christ within the following 2 weeks. Magdi, who had fled, returned to the church 3 months later and gave his life to Jesus in the same pew where I had given mine. 5 months after that morning, I was baptized at the Church of the Holy Virgin. I chose the name Maher Morkos. Maher, my birth name meaning skilled, and Morkos, the Arabic form of Mark, the apostle who brought Christianity to Egypt. I wanted the name of the man who first planted the faith in this land. What happened next changed everything, and the cost was more than I imagined a person could survive. That is when it happened. the second destruction. When I told my father, his face turned to stone. His voice came out cold and flat. "You are no longer my son. You are dead to us. You have brought a shame on this family that 1,000 lifetimes cannot wash away." My mother collapsed against the doorframe and wept like I had died in front of her. She blocked my phone number 2 days later. Before she did, she sent one text: "How could you do this to us?" Noura threw her engagement ring at my feet in her father's garden and called me murtad. She said she would rather never marry than share a bed with an apostate. Within 2 months, I lost my fiancé, my family, my apartment, and my position at the firm. Former friends held funeral prayers for me at the mosque. Death threats arrived by text and letter. I eventually had to leave Minya and relocate to a small town in the Fayum region. But I gained everything that truly matters. I gained Jesus Christ, the living God who stood among broken bells and made them sing. I gained forgiveness that covered every stone I ever threw and every bell I ever tore down. I gained a peace that no silence and no sound can shake. And I gained a church family at the Holy Virgin, who loved me the same morning I had tried to destroy their voice. That was over 2 years ago. Today I work with a ministry reaching Muslims across Upper Egypt, and I carry a specific message: that Jesus cannot be silenced. Not by towers torn down, not by bells removed, not by governments or mobs or laws. His voice finds a way. I had no idea my testimony would travel the way it has. Over 95 Muslims have accepted Christ after hearing my story. Many of them were men who had filed complaints against church bells, who had thrown stones at church walls, who had spent their lives trying to make Christianity quieter. They learned what I learned: you cannot silence a God who is alive. A year ago, I married a Christian woman named Demiana. She is Coptic, she is fierce and tender, and she understands the cost of faith in Egypt because her own grandfather was killed during anti-Christian riots in the 1980s. We were married at the Church of the Holy Virgin. Father Mina officiated. Adele and Taha stood beside me as groomsmen. The bells had been repaired by then, recast, remounted, and hung in the same tower I had climbed with ropes and iron bars. During our wedding, Father Mina rang those bells, and the sound that had once made my blood boil now made my eyes fill with tears of joy so deep I could not speak. The first words my daughter Mariam heard when she was born 4 months ago were not the Islamic call to prayer, but the ringing of church bells through an open window and a whispered blessing in the name of Jesus. I still send letters to my parents twice a year, once on my mother's birthday and once during Eid. No response has ever come. I pray for them every morning at the hour the bells ring. I do not know if they will ever speak to me again, but the God who made 3 broken bells ring from a courtyard floor while I wept in a tower above them is powerful enough to make their hearts ring too. Look inside your own heart right now. The Muslim man who climbed a bell tower with ropes and iron bars to silence the church no longer exists. In his place stands a follower of Jesus Christ who listens for those bells every Sunday morning and who would die before trying to silence the voice of the God who called his name from among the wreckage. Will you let him in and finally stop trying to silence the voice that has been calling your name all along?